details about the current labor dispute are well known and documented. So I don't really want to comment on them directly. But I think what I want to say is that I think the strike is a symptom of a much larger problem that is facing, I think, the university and universities across Canada. Now, I want to sort of begin by saying that, a crisis, however troubling and disruptive the crisis is, can also present us with a learning opportunity. And a lot of my comments are going to be based on the work of the Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben, because I think that what he has to say about some of the kind of current situations that we face in the world also apply in a way, I think, to the current labor dispute at the University of Toronto. Agamben has argued that it's only in the house that has been ravaged by fire that the fundamental architectural problem becomes visible for the first time. Now, I think it's only when something like an institution faces a crisis, like the current strike, for example, that we can grasp, I think, the fundamental problems that plague it. So the current crisis at the University of Toronto, I think, opens up really fundamental questions that go, I think, much deeper than, issues concerning wages or tuition fees or guaranteed financial support for graduate students and TAs. These are, I think, very important issues. These are important livelihood issues. And I don't want to trivialize them. But I think what is important is that these issues really kind of represent, I think, a much, much larger problem. And of course, this has to do with lack of funding by the provincial and federal governments. We all know that. The increasing corporatization, or what I much prefer calling the increasing instrumentalization and economization of universities, where the only metric that counts is quantity and results. And I think the other problem is the constitution and governance of the university, especially when the university no longer is a place where there are shared values or even a sense of what the university is or should be. So these are really important questions that I think the current crisis really opens up. I'm kind of in a bit of despair over the kind of position that the TAs occupy. And I think TAs occupy a structurally vulnerable position in the current dispute, because I think they're made to occupy a very kind of ambiguous zone, kind of a zone of indistinction, to use Agamben's terms, and to become part of what Agamben calls a logic of inclusive exclusion. Let me explain this concept, okay? Now, TAs are included in the university, right, as graduate students and as potential faculty members, right? The role as teaching assistants kind of make them both, kind of apprentices and therefore, like future professors. So they are kind of very much included in the university. But they're also excluded from the university because they're excluded as workers or laborers belonging to a trade union, right? So as graduate students and as potential teachers, they can be given financial support or compensation in the form of graduate bursaries, scholarships, and grants. They are included in the warm embrace of the university, right? But they are also excluded, right, as workers, and their demands for a guaranteed wage package. And these demands for a guaranteed wage package are treated as demands by a stubborn, bargaining trade union. So in their role as members of CUPE, they are excluded, not seen really as belonging to the academic university community. They are relegated to the category of mere worker, and their relationship to the university then is now regarded as that of a struggle between employer and employee. So TAs are placed in a really difficult and vulnerable position. To become a person valued by the university, right? Again, who the university is of course, a question, although, of course, the administration very often sees themselves as the university. And they very often make the mistake of claiming that they are the university or that they represent the university. So the university administration says, to become a person valued by us, you have to give up your status as workers, right, and enter a zone of indistinction in which the TA's status as worker is negated and qualified by their status as members of the academic community. They can thus be pressured in both their roles. They can be pressured as students, and they can be pressured as workers. They are included in the university as students and as future faculty members, and they are excluded from it as workers. So so TAs really occupy a structural position that is, and I'm not trying to exaggerate the matter, but they occupy a position that's somewhat like that of Agamben's bare life, or what Agamben also calls Homo Sacer, the sacred man, as he puts it, belongs and does not belong to the law of the city, right? That is to say, because he does not belong to the city or to the laws of the city, he can be killed without consequence, right? But he can also not be sacrificed because he's already included, given over, and consecrated to the city, the laws of the city. So, I mean, there's a kind of analogy here. So even though there are no lethal consequences, no TAs are going to be, imprisoned or, whatever. So even though there are no lethal consequences, the TA's demands, their proposals can be denied. That is to say, these demands can be killed at the table. They can be rejected, denied. They can be killed at the table. Because as QP workers, they are not part of the university, right? So, the university does not owe them anything. They are outside the university, right? But they can't be sacrificed either. They can't be abandoned. They can't be written off because they are also included in the university as students. I mean, they are in fact part, paradoxically, they are part of the university's policy of academic continuity. I mean, so you have this paradox here. The people who are accused of disruption, of in fact bringing the university into a state of disruption, are also in fact parts of the members of, they are part of the university. They are members of the university. They are in fact part of the academic continuity which the university wants to kind of impose. So, I mean, TAs are really in this very vulnerable, kind of ambiguous position. They are outside, but they are also inside, and the university can take advantage of that. They can, when TAs are inside, they can say, oh, well, look, I mean, we're giving them lots of bursaries, lots of stuff, they are inside, they are part of us. But we can't give them a guaranteed wage package because, it's a labor struggle. They are outside the university. They're just workers. They're negotiating with us. So, so TAs are really in a vulnerable position. They are, they can be, they can be resisted, but they can also be, but they can also be placated. I mean, they can be both resisted and placated at the same time. I want to comment on, the current situation, because your question is very much about the current situation. And, part of it is how the administration is handling the dispute. And I think here the work of Agamben can help us, because the first question to ask is, where does the identity and the authority of the university lie? In other words, what is the sovereignty of the university? Where does the sovereignty of the university lie? Is it the faculty? Is it the students, graduates and undergraduates, who are clearly the majority in the university? Is it the teaching assistants, who are graduate students but also faculty members of the future? Is it the university's administrators and managers, who incidentally are basically not elected but appointed by various boards and committees? Is it the taxpayers who fund the university? Now, I mean, so the question of sovereignty, I think, is key here. Now, Agamben, following the work of the German jurist Carl Schmitt, would say that the sovereign is the person, or he, or the board, who decides on the exception, who calls into being the state of exception or the state of emergency in which normal regulations, normal laws, in other words, the normal business of university life, are suspended in order, in fact, to protect these norms, right? So the norms are suspended in order to protect the norms. But what is also true is that even though the norms are suspended, their force is still very much in play. In fact, the paradox here is that the more the norms are suspended, the more the force of the norms are in effect. Okay? So the sovereign is the power that can suspend the normal order of business in order to kind of protect the normal order of business. Now you can see how this can relate to the situation that the strike has led us to. I mean, who can declare a state of disruption and declare an academic emergency? Well, it's clearly, putting the whole university in a state of emergency or exception. Well, it's clearly, according to the policy on academic continuity, a policy which was approved by the academic board in January 2012, the authority is, in fact, the vice president and provost or the academic board. They can declare, in fact, a state of disruption, which is essentially a state of emergency or a state of exception. And if I can cite the policy, it says, the purpose of such a declaration is to serve notice that the academic operations of the university will not proceed as normal. It provides the authority for the university. The question is, who is the university, right? I mean, the vice president and provost, the academic board, are they the university? But anyway, to continue with the policy, it provides the authority for the university to make changes to any aspect of its academic activities, including the delivery of courses and programs, course and program requirements, modes of evaluation, and the length of the academic term, etc. Covers a very broad range of options for the university's administration. So one should also note that the disruptive events described in the policy include pandemic, health emergencies, natural disasters, prolonged service interruptions, and most tellingly, ongoing labor disputes. Right? Now what's interesting is that the university administration has not declared a university-wide state of disruption, though it keeps insisting on the principle of academic continuity. In other words, it's saying that it is business as usual because it has not declared a state of disruption, and yet it also acknowledges that it is in fact not business as usual because it is invoking the principle of academic continuity, which will not usually be stressed unless, of course, things are not normal. So there's a kind of paradox here. University is saying, things are normal, but of course things are not normal, therefore we have to invoke the principle of academic continuity, right? There's a kind of interesting kind of paradox here that we see at play. I mean, this is clearly an example where, in fact, the exceptional state, the state of disruption, the state of emergency, has now become, in fact, normalized. It is now, in fact, the exception becoming the norm, which is exactly what Giorgio Agamben, citing the work of the German, thinker Walter Benjamin has said, that we live in times in which the state of emergency has now become the norm. It's not just a moment of disruption. It's now in which disruption is always accompanied by the principle of academic continuity. Everything is normal. So the university has now become a place in which the state of disruption is accommodated by the principle of academic continuity. The emergency or exception that is not declared, that remains undeclared, has now become, in fact, the norm. So even when these emergency measures are not implemented or employed as policy, they remain as potential forms of action, right? And thus, because they are potential forms of action, they become, in fact, really quite effective because they are capable of regulating everyone's conduct by precisely the threat that these measures will be imposed, right? So, for example, what has happened is that, because a lot of instructors kind of fear that, a state of disruption will be declared and then, the administration can then kind of, change their courses, change their methods of evaluation. A lot of instructors fearing that the integrity of their courses will be taken over by the university's administration are now beginning to change their courses and so on. And they're doing that because they fear that academic integrity will be compromised by, in fact, academic continuity, right? So again, there's this kind of sense in which the threat of imposing, it's not even imposing emergency measures. It's just the threat. I mean, we can at any point declare a state of disruption or a state of emergency. That threat is already regulating the conduct of a lot of instructors. Now, as to what TAs can do in all of this, I don't really know. I mean, but I think, again, there is a much larger question, and I don't want to take up too much time, but it seems to me that, and again, if I may quote Agamben, Agamben has said that, education today is a catastrophe. I mean, I don't, want to go that far and say it's a catastrophe. But I think, as Bill Reddings pointed out in 1996 in a very important book called University in Ruins, I mean, it's a book that is very prescient. I mean, it talks about the corporatization of the university. It talks about the ways in which, the old humanist values that used to kind of, support, or even the kind of national values that used to support the old, the old notion of the university no longer exist. I mean, what is the university? Is it a vocational institution? Is it just totally instrumentalized? Is it a corporatized university? It seems to me it's a kind of like a corporation, except that unlike a corporation, the members of the university administration are not, as it were, very often kind of responsible. I mean, nobody can vote them out of office, so to speak. But I mean, in corporations, they are in fact stakeholders who can vote them out. So, but at any rate, I mean, I think Bill Reddings is right in saying that we really inhabit a university. The idea of the university is completely ruined. I mean, we are in the ruins of the university. But that is not to say that thinking and teaching and learning cannot occur. So maybe the thing to do is not to, is to remain in the university, but not to think with the university, to be in the university, but not to think with it, but to think outside it, right? And I think there's a lot of things that can happen. In other words, the university is now inoperative, and education, I think, has become, captured by instrumental, utilitarian, and or result-oriented logic, and a kind of economic logic that I think a lot of people in the university would want to resist, and would not want to see the university be that. But I think we have to sever the idea of the university from that of any kind of end-oriented forms of teaching. And this is what, again, Agamben has argued for. What we need are sort of means. Education is a means, and it's a continuing means, but it does not have an end. Because to have an end is to, in fact, do away with, I think, the very idea of education. I mean, the etymology of the word education is educere, which is to, to lead out, to bring forth. So education, I think, should be one of continual questioning and moving without an end, a kind of instrumental end in mind or sight. So, my question then is, I think the TAs, I don't know if, what the TAs can do, but what the TAs have done is provided us, I think, with an opening into the question of what the university is. So in that sense, I think, there are lots of lessons to be learned from this strike, lessons that are really fundamental to the very idea of what the university is.
Thank you very much.